Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Okay, students, this is our sixth lecture on discourse analysis. Uh, this lecture will develop three of the tools of inquiry we discussed in the last lecture. We have discussed social languages and intertextuality and conversations. Social languages. Students, the course outline of today's lecture is who's doing words in language and social languages, two grammars, intertextuality, big C conversation, and social languages, intertextuality, and discourses as tools of inquiry. Students, this chapter will develop three of the tools of inquiry we discussed in the last lecture. We are going to discuss social languages, then intertextuality, and then conversation regarding the textual and contextual understanding of the text. Social languages. Students, social languages are different varieties of language that allow us to express different socially significant identities. For example, talking and writing as a mathematician, doctor, or a group member, and enact different socially meaningful activities. For example, offering a proof in mathematics, writing prescription in medicine, demonstrating solidarity with a fellow group member. Students, intertextuality refers to cases where one oral or written text directly or indirectly quotes another text or alludes to another text in yet more subtle ways. Conversation with a capital C, on the other hand, are debates in society or within specific social groups that large numbers of people recognize in terms of both that sides there are to take in such debates and what sorts of people tend to be on each side. Students, first we discuss social languages and their role in text and context, their role to understand the context of a text. Student, there is a term that it is useful in place of the phrase who doing what as far as the language aspects of who doing words are connecting, remembering that in reality language is caught up with other stuff in discourses. We understand this term with the understanding of the concept of social language. Each of the who's doing words we saw on the aspiring bottom in linguistically expressed in different social languages, different social significant varieties of language. All languages like English or French or Urdu are composed of many different social languages. Social languages are what we learn, and what we speak. Keep in mind that social languages and discourses are terms for different things. So here in this lecture we use the term social languages to talk about the role of language in discourses. But what we discussed in previous lectures, that discourses always invoke more than language. They always invoke coordinating languages with ways of acting, interacting, valuing, believing, feeling, and with bodies, clothes, non-linguistic symbols, objects, tools, technologies, times, and places. Students, each social language has its own distinctive grammar. However, two different sorts of grammars are important to social languages, only one of which we ever think to study formally in school. One grammar is the traditional set of units like nouns, verbs, inflections, phrases, and clauses. These are real enough, quite inadequately described in traditional school grammars. Let us call this grammar 1. The other, less studied but more important grammar, is the rules by which grammatical units like nouns and verbs, phrases, and clauses are used to create patterns which signal or index characteristic who's doing words within discourses. That is, we speakers and writers design our oral or written utterances to have patterns in them, in virtue of which interpreters can attribute situated identities and specific activities to us and our utterances. So students, we may call this grammar 2. This pattern, I hasten to add, are not fancy devices of post-modern social sciences. Social science. They have been named in linguistics for a long time. Linguists call them collocational patterns. This means that various sorts of grammatical devices collocate with each other. The patterns we are trying to name here are correlations among many grammatical devices from different levels of grammar 1. These correlations in turn also correlate or coordinate other non-language stuff to continue to constitute for historical, that is conventional reasons, or to continue who's doing words within discourses. Students, the term social language applies to specific varieties of language used to enact specific identities and carry out specific sorts of activities. A single written or oral text can be in one social language, or it can switch between two or more, or even mix them pretty thoroughly. The warning from the aspirin bottle switches back and forth between two different varieties of language. Sometimes, however, a text spoken or written in one variety of language or one social language will accomplish sort of switching by incorporating or borrowing words from another text spoken or written in the same or a different variety of language. This process students, we call intertextuality, in which one text can incorporate words from another one in a great variety of different ways. In this regard, Norman Fairclough has this to say about intertextuality. Intertextuality is basically the property texts have of being full of snatches of other texts which may be explicitly demarcated or emerged in, and which the text may assimilate, contradict, ironically echo, and so forth. Students, now it is time to become clearer about what we mean by the word discussion above when we say things like the utterance of these social languages of a text have meaning, or at least the meanings they are in fact taken to have, thanks to being embedded in specific social discussions. Students, when we talk about things like the general societal discussion around issues such as smoking, we are using the word discussion in a partly metaphorical way. Of course, we are talking about the public debates that swirl around us in the media, in our reading, and in our interaction with other people. Not any one specific discussion among specific people. Students, on certain issues, for example, smoking, gambling, feminism, affirmative action, etc., you know what these sides are, how they are talked about, and what sort of people tend to be on specific sides. Some of these sorts of issues are known by nearly everyone in a society. Others are known only by specific social groups. For example, the ongoing big conversations in a given academic field. This knowledge, students, is an ever-present background you can bring to interpret things you hear and read, or in terms of which you can formulate your own talk and writing. Students, we may call such public debates, arguments, motives, issues, or themes conversations with a capital C, speaking metaphorically as if the various sides in debates around issues such as smoking were engaged in one big ground conversation or debate or argument, whatever we want to call it. Of course, this big conversation is imposed of a myriad of interactional events taking place among specific people at specific times and places. Okay, students, in this chapter we have treated the term social languages of a text, intertextuality, conversations, and discourses realistically. We may have spoken about them as things that exist in the mind and in the world, and indeed this is, I believe, both true and the easiest way to grasp what they mean and how and why they are significant for discourse analysis. But students, it is important to realize that in the end, these terms are are ultimately our ways as an analysis and analysts of talking about and thus constructing the world. And it is in this guise that we are primarily interested in them. They are tools of inquiry, social languages, intertextuality, conversations, and discourses are thinking devices that guide us to ask certain sorts of questions. Faced with a piece of oral or written language, we ask the following sorts of questions. Students, in all the previous lectures and in today's one, we are going to discuss the relationship between text and context. So, uh, so when we read a text, even a literary or non-literary text, so we may keep in our mind that this literary and non-literary text is the production of society in which that text is produced. So this text is the production and the producer of that society. So we may argue, we may retrieve the culture of that society in which the text is written. So students, I am also sharing some of the books on discourse analysis with you people. I hope you read them. You may ask any question on WhatsApp as well on your studies. Some of the students, I got the presentation of some of the students and they are good and I appreciate their efforts, and I also encourage the other one to submit their own assignments as well. Okay students, in next class we would discuss the importance of context while reading a text. See you students. Allah Hafiz.